The vote had already been cast before I walked into the chamber. I could feel it in the air. That specific kind of stillness that comes right before something permanent happens. My name is Sarah Voss, and I had been standing in rooms like this for 22 years, representing Earth at the Galactic Accord Council. I knew what the silence meant. I had learned to read it the way you learn to read weather before a storm. And what I read that morning told me that everything we had worked for was about to be buried under ceremony and politics, the way it always was. The session was supposed to be about reparations. 41 humans had been killed in the Kareth conflict, a border war between the Tool Dominion and the Velhari Federation that had nothing to do with Earth, nothing to do with us, nothing to do with the lives of the 41 people whose names I had memorized the night before, because I thought someone in that chamber should at least know them. Their names were stitched into my memory like a wound. Not one of the alien delegates had bothered to learn a single one. Grand Legate Sovereign III of the Tool called the session to order at exactly the 7th cycle, which translated to something close to 9 in the morning by Earth time. She had 4 arms and used all of them when she spoke, gesturing in wide arcs that the other species read as authority. To humans, it always looked like someone trying to keep their balance on a boat. I had learned not to smile at it. You learn a lot of things, working in diplomacy. You learn to keep your face still. You learn to say nothing when you want to say everything. You learn to fold your anger into a very small shape and keep it somewhere nobody can see it. The resolution was read aloud by the council recorder, a gray-skinned mech named Orvin, who had been reading resolutions for longer than Earth had been a member. His voice was flat and musical at once, like someone playing a single chord on a large instrument. He read that the council recognized the contribution of human defense forces in the Kareth engagement. He read that the council recognized the contribution of human defense forces in the Kareth engagement. He read that, in recognition of this service, Earth's provisional membership status would be extended for another 15 years, pending review. Pending review. I had been pushing for full membership for 6 years, full voting rights, a permanent seat, recognition that humanity was not a provisional species, not a trial member, not a candidate still being evaluated. We were a civilization that had existed for longer than the Council itself. We had solved problems the Council had listed as unsolvable. We had poured our people into their wars, our resources into their infrastructure, our knowledge into their medical databases. And the answer was always the same: not yet. Be patient. You are still being assessed. I stood up. Protocol required me to wait for the floor, but I had stopped caring about protocol sometime around the 3rd year of watching humans be told to sit down and wait. I said, clearly, in High Galactic, that the resolution was insufficient, that 41 human lives deserved more than an extension of the same status that had been used to underpay, undervalue, and underconsult Earth for 4 decades, that humanity had earned full membership 12 times over, by any metric the Council itself had established. Sovereign III looked at me the way she always did, with that specific expression that the Tool made when they were trying to calculate whether something was worth responding to. She said, in a tone that was technically polite and actually dismissive, that the Council appreciated Earth's continued enthusiasm. Enthusiasm, that was the word she used. I sat back down, not because I had nothing more to say, because I understood, in that moment, with a clarity I had never felt before, that there was nothing left to say, not to them, not in this room, not in this language, not in any language, not in any format or forum or resolution. There was nothing left to say because they were not listening, had never been listening, and had built an entire architecture of procedure and protocol specifically so they never had to listen. I looked at the other human delegates. Kaylin Marsh, our defense advisor, was staring at the floor. Nina Okafor, our science liaison, had her hands folded in her lap and her jaw tight. Owen Dre, the youngest member of our team, was watching me with the specific expression of someone waiting to see what you do when you finally understand something terrible. After the session, I messaged Director Hale on Earth's secure channel. I sent 3 words. I think we are done. She replied in 4. Tell me what you need. I told her. We talked for 6 hours that night, Hale and I, and the 6 other senior delegates who had been stationed across council space. We did not shout. We did not throw things. We were very calm and very quiet, and very certain, the way people are when they have been thinking about something for a long time, and finally allow themselves to reach the conclusion they had been holding at arm's length. We were going to leave, not angrily, not dramatically, not with a manifesto or a declaration or a speech. We were going to stop showing up. We were going to recall every shuttle, every ship, every person. We were going to close every embassy, let every channel go silent, and go home. No statement, no ultimatum, no threat, just the clean, honest action of people who had decided they were done being ignored. Kalon said it felt like giving up. I told him it was the opposite. Giving up would have been staying. Staying and smiling and shaking hands and pretending the ceremony was meaningful. Leaving was the only honest thing we had left. The hardest part was not the decision. The hardest part was the next morning. I got up before anyone else was awake, dressed in my formal Earth delegate uniform, and walked to the observation deck of the council station. I stood at the window and looked at the stars. Somewhere in that direction was home, though I could not have pointed to it exactly. Somewhere out there was a planet that had sent me here and trusted me to make things better. And I had spent 22 years trying, and the result was 41 names I had memorized and a resolution that called our grief enthusiasm. I did not feel rage. I had expected to. I had imagined, in my worst moments, that when this day came I would feel something volcanic and enormous. Instead, I felt very still. The kind of still that comes after something is finally decided. Like the moment you set down a weight you have been carrying for so long that you forgot it was heavy until it was gone. Drix found me at the window. He was Velhari, one of the few council members who had ever treated our conversations like actual conversations rather than diplomatic transactions. He had silver skin and large dark eyes, and he stood beside me for a long time without speaking, which was unusual for him. Then he said quietly that he had heard about the vote. I said yes. He said he was sorry. I told him it was not his fault. He said he knew, and that was the part that bothered him most. He pressed a small data cube into my hand. He told me to keep it. He said there were things recorded on it that I might find useful someday, and that he hoped I never needed them, but that he suspected I would. I looked at him for a long moment. He had the expression of someone who had seen this coming long before I had. I asked him how long he had known. He said, very softly, that he had known since the second year of my posting, and that he had hoped he was wrong, and that he was very sorry he had not been. I put the cube in my pocket. I turned back to the window. The shuttles left in groups of 2 and 3 over the next 4 days, timed carefully so as not to trigger the automatic alert systems that would have flagged a mass departure. Kellan managed the timing. Nina deleted the access codes for every human-maintained database she had clearance to. Owen packed the last of the station files and took a photograph of the empty desk before he left, which I only found out about years later when he showed it to me. I was the last to leave. Protocol. Again. Or something like it. I walked through the human wing of the station, which was already quiet and slightly dim, the environmental systems already shifting resources to other sections without human hands to maintain them. I walked down the corridor where I had walked 10,000 times. I passed the small kitchen where Kalon made terrible coffee every morning and insisted it was fine. I passed the room where Owen had once fallen asleep during a 17-hour council session and snored so quietly that nobody except me had noticed. I stood at the shuttle bay door. I did not look back at the council spire. I had thought I would want to. I didn't. I stepped onto the shuttle and the door closed, and we lifted away from the station, and I watched the council chambers grow small through the viewport and then disappear entirely into the dark. We didn't leave because we hated them. We left because we finally understood that they had never noticed us enough to hate back. And that, in the end, was the thing that could not be fixed with another resolution, another session, another careful diplomatic sentence in a language that had no word for what we were trying to say. We went home. And we did not say a single word to anyone about why. There is something strange about silence when it is chosen rather than forced. For the first few months after we came home, Earth felt like a place that had been holding its breath and finally allowed itself to breathe. The recall had been quiet enough that it took the Council nearly 3 weeks to formally acknowledge that the human delegations were gone. Their first official message arrived at Earth's orbital relay station on a Tuesday morning, routed through standard diplomatic channels, marked urgent. It asked, in the careful language of bureaucracy, whether there had been a miscommunication regarding scheduled attendance at the upcoming trade alignment sessions. I read it at my kitchen table in Cardiff, drinking tea I had made myself for the first time in years. My house was small and slightly crooked, and had a garden that had been badly neglected during my postings. I had a cat named Biscuit, who had spent the last 12 years with my sister, and regarded me with the specific suspicion of an animal that had been told you were coming back, and is not yet sure whether to trust that information. I read the message twice, then I closed it and went back to my tea. Director Hale had asked me to serve as a consultant during the transition, which was a careful word for what was essentially a position of watching and waiting. Earth's government had made the decision collectively, through a process that was longer and messier and more honest than any council vote I had ever witnessed. There were arguments in Parliament that lasted 3 days. There were people who believed we were making a catastrophic mistake. There were others who believed we were 30 years too late in making it. There were people who cried, which I had not expected, and people who laughed, which I also had not expected, and people who sat in the gallery and were completely quiet in a way that told me they understood the weight of what was being decided. The resolution, when it finally passed, was simple. Earth would maintain no diplomatic presence in council space. Earth would issue no statements, respond to no requests, and make no acknowledgement of council communications, unless those communications met a specific set of conditions, which had been written by a team of lawyers and diplomats and 2 retired military generals who had between them more than a century of experience watching Earth be taken advantage of. The conditions were strict. Nobody expected them to be met anytime soon. What came next was something none of us had fully planned for, though some of us had hoped for it. The first thing to break was the navigation system. The Accord's main trade routes ran through 4 gravity well clusters that required extremely precise jump calculations to navigate safely. For decades, human navigators had held the majority of posts at the route monitoring stations, partly because human mathematical intuition turned out to be unusually well suited to the kind of spatial pattern recognition that safe jump plotting required, and partly because humans would do the work for a salary that the council considered modest and the navigators themselves considered reasonable. Nobody had explicitly said that human navigators were essential. It had simply never occurred to anyone to check. When the human navigators left, the council assigned the posts to Mech and Faluran crews, both of which were technically qualified by council certification standards. What council certification standards did not account for was the difference between theoretical qualification and the specific practice skill that comes from doing something every day for years. The Mech crews were careful and competent. They were also slower, and in the mathematics of high-traffic jump corridors, slower meant more ships arriving at irregular intervals, which meant congestion, which meant delays, which meant the kind of cascading cargo problems that turn into political problems very quickly when the cargo in question is food. I found out about the first corridor collapse from Drix. He had been sending me encrypted messages through a personal channel he had established before we left, careful and irregular enough that they did not trigger council monitoring protocols. His messages were always short. This one said simply that the Vithani corridor had been closed for 11 days, and that 3 colony stations in the outer belt were on restricted rations. I pulled out the data cube he had given me the morning I left. I had looked at it many times over the months, in the way you look at something you are not yet ready to open. I finally put it in the reader. What was on it was not, as I had half expected, intelligence or evidence of council wrongdoing. It was simpler and worse than that. It was a maintenance log. Specifically, it was every maintenance log for the council's main station over the previous 20 years, annotated by Drix's own hand, with every task highlighted in a different color depending on which species had performed it. Human tasks were marked in orange. There were thousands of them. They covered everything from reactor cooling inspections to atmospheric calibration to the structural integrity checks on the older docking rings that the council kept meaning to replace but never did, because the human maintenance crews kept them functional. I sat with that cube for a long time. The second thing to break was the medical system. Human doctors and medics had been integrated into council health infrastructure since the early years of our membership, initially because Earth medical knowledge was considered novel enough to be worth observing, and eventually because it turned out that humans had, through a combination of evolutionary history and sheer necessity, developed cross-species medical intuition that nobody else in the council had. It was a strange gift, born from centuries of Earth medicine that had required doctors to treat patients with wildly varying physiologies, allergies, and conditions. Humans had gotten very good at improvising. Other species had gotten very good at optimizing for known cases. When something unknown walked through the door, improvisation was worth more than optimization. And there were no humans left to improvise. A border skirmish between the Tool and a fringe colony faction led to 3,000 casualties at a council field station. The casualty report that Drix forwarded to me was not marked classified, which told me either that he was growing bolder or that the council was too overwhelmed to notice. The survival rate was 40% lower than the projected figure that had been used to justify the military response. The medical coordinator's report, attached to the casualty list, used the phrase unexpected complications in cross-species trauma management 11 times. I read that phrase and thought of Dr. Nella Marsh, Kellan's older sister, who had spent 14 years at that exact field station and had trained every medic on staff before she came home. Nella had never mentioned that she was essential. She had just done her work and gone home when we went home, and now 3,000 beings had experienced the difference. Nina Okafor called me that evening, which was unusual. We had stayed in contact but not often, the way people do when they share a significant experience, but have returned to different lives in different cities. She was in Lagos, consulting for Earth's new orbital ring project, and she sounded like someone who had been sitting with difficult information and needed to finally say it out loud. She said she had been monitoring Council scientific output through public channels. She said that the collaborative research programs that had been running for years, the ones on cascading organ failure, on cross-species viral adaptation, on the agricultural systems that fed 5 outer belt colonies, had stalled. Not failed. Stalled. Still technically active, just not progressing. Because the humans who had been doing the majority of the actual daily work on those programs were home, and nobody had thought to ask them to write down exactly how they were doing what they were doing, and so the knowledge had simply come back with them. I asked her if she felt bad about it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said she felt complicated about it. She said she had spent 14 years sharing everything she knew, and being told it was interesting but not quite equal, and not quite ready, and not quite enough. And now apparently it was actually indispensable, and she was not sure whether to feel vindicated or sad. I told her I understood. She said she knew. We stayed on the call for a while without saying much, which felt correct. Kellan sent me a message the following week that was much shorter and contained significantly more profanity, which was his way of processing things. The Council had sent a second communication to Earth's relay, this one more urgent in tone, asking for clarification on the status of human delegation and requesting confirmation that human navigation, medical, and maintenance contractors would be returning to their posts. The message was addressed to the office of the Chief Human Representative, a position that had been quietly dissolved 3 weeks after we came home. Earth's relay station sent back an automated acknowledgement, which was all it was programmed to do. Drix's next message arrived 2 weeks later. It was longer than his usual messages, which meant he was worried. He described the situation on the Council's central station in careful, measured language, the kind people use when they know something might be read by others later. He said that the secondary water reclamation system on the residential ring had been flagging maintenance alerts for 11 days, and that the primary contractor assigned to resolve it had been a human team that was no longer present. He said the backup system was managing, but that the backup system had itself not been serviced in 4 months, because the human specialist who held the maintenance contract had come home during the recall. He said, at the end of the message, that he missed our conversations. He said he hoped we had made the right choice. He said he believed we had. He said believing something was right and watching what it cost were 2 things that could exist at the same time, and that he had learned that from watching humans, actually, which he thought we might find ironic. I thought about Sovereign 3, in her 4-armed authority, reading the resolution about enthusiasm. I thought about the 41 names. I thought about Nella Marsh and Nina Okafor and Owen Dre photographing an empty desk, and Kellan Marsh making bad coffee in a corridor that was now dark and quiet and humming, with systems that were slowly, quietly, beginning to complain about the absence of the hands that had kept them running. I did not feel satisfied. That was the strangest part. I had imagined, in the quiet part of myself that I did not often look at directly, that there would come a moment when the scale of it would feel like satisfaction, like something balanced, like a proof completed. Instead, I felt the way you feel when you have been right about something you wished you were wrong about. Still, a little hollow, watching something unfold the way you knew it would, and finding no pleasure in the knowing. Biscuit jumped onto my lap and put his head on my arm, which he had started doing regularly once he decided I was probably staying this time. I scratched behind his ears. Outside the window, Cardiff was quiet and gray and ordinary, and the garden needed work, and upstairs there were unpacked boxes I had been ignoring for 6 months. The council's third communication arrived the next morning. It was addressed directly to me, by name, which was new. It was marked personal, which was new. And it was signed not by an administrative coordinator but by Grand Legate Sovereign III herself, which was the kind of new that made me sit very still for a moment before I read it. She said she would like to speak with me personally, at my convenience, regarding matters of significant mutual concern. I read the phrase mutual concern twice. I noticed that she had written it in Galactic Standard, and then, below it, in a slightly uncertain but recognizable attempt at English, which was new in a way that nothing else had been. I set the message down. I looked at Biscuit. He looked back at me with the complete indifference of a cat who has decided to trust you and finds the formality of your problems beneath comment. I did not reply that day, or the next. I was not ready yet, and I was not going to be rushed, and for the first time in 22 years, there was no protocol that required me to be. The shuttle that arrived at Earth's orbital checkpoint was a Tool diplomatic vessel, which should have been a sleek and intimidating machine. The Tool built their ships with that intention, long and angular, with a dark finish that absorbed light in a way that was technically functional and aesthetically designed to communicate power. I had stood across negotiating tables from Tool diplomats for years and understood the aesthetic very well. This ship had been traveling for 22 days, the standard run, with human navigation support through the Vithani corridor, was 7. Even with the corridor closed and the alternate routing, a ship with a competent crew and current charts should have made it in 11 or 12. 22 days meant problems, real ones. I watched it come in on the checkpoint monitor from the secondary observation bay, standing next to Colonel Owen Dre, who was now not the youngest member of anything, but still had the same expression of careful attention that he had worn at every council session I had ever watched him sit through. He was in uniform. I was not. I had not worn my formal delegate uniform since the day I came home, and I was not planning to wear it today. The ship's approach was unsteady. The docking guidance system had to correct it twice, which the automated log noted with the neutral language of a machine that does not understand embarrassment. When the boarding tube sealed and the pressure equalized, and the hatch finally opened, 3 things were apparent immediately. First, the ship had sustained stress fractures along the forward hull, visible through the viewport as faint silver lines where the material had compressed and partially recovered. Second, the crew looked exhausted in the specific way that space travel exhausts people when things have gone wrong and nobody has slept properly. Third, the woman who came through the hatch first was Grand Legate Sovereign III herself, which I had not expected. She was taller than I remembered, or perhaps I had forgotten the scale of her. The Tool were a tall species, and Sovereign III was tall even for her kind, with the forearms folded in the position that indicated formal engagement and the kind of controlled expression that came from years of political practice. She was thinner than the last time I had seen her. Her formal garments were correct and pressed, which told me she had prepared carefully for this arrival, which told me she understood that appearances were all she currently had to work with. She stopped when she saw me. There was a moment of something that moved across her face, quickly, that I could not entirely name. Not surprise, she had been told I would be here. Something else. Something that looked almost like relief, which I had not anticipated. I let the silence stay for a moment before I spoke. I said, in Tool, which I had been practicing since her first message arrived, that she was welcome at Earth's checkpoint, and that we hoped her journey had been manageable. She replied in Tool, then paused, and then said, in careful English that was more accurate than her written attempt had been, that she appreciated the welcome. It was a small thing, but it was not nothing. Owen's security team completed the standard boarding check with the quiet efficiency of people who have been trained well and trust each other. While that was happening, I observed the crew. There were 14 of them, Tool and Mech. and they moved with the careful deliberateness of people who were tired, but maintaining discipline. One of the Metch crew members, a young one, was holding his left arm at an angle that suggested the shoulder joint had been strained, probably during one of the correction maneuvers on approach. He had not reported it. He was managing. I noticed Nina Okafor, who had come down from Lagos for this, notice it too, and say something quiet to one of the medical officers. The debrief room was small and functional. I had specifically asked that it not be arranged to look ceremonial. No flags, no formal table configuration, no elevated seating, 2 chairs on each side, a table between them, water on both sides, light that was adequate without being harsh. Sovereign 3 looked at the room when she entered, and then looked at me, and something in her expression shifted slightly, which told me she had understood the message in the arrangement. She sat down. I sat across from her. Owen stood near the door. Her 2 senior aides sat behind her. We were quiet for a moment, and then I said simply that I understood she had something she wished to present. She reached into the document case she had carried personally from the ship and produced a scroll. It was physical, which was unusual for council documents, and it was sealed with 14 marks, which I counted without appearing to count them. She set it on the table between us and told me it was a formal apology, ratified by the full council, for the cumulative failures of regard, recognition, and reciprocity extended to humanity during Earth's provisional membership period. I looked at the scroll. I looked at her. I did not pick it up. I asked her to tell me who had written it. She said a committee had drafted it, representing all council species. She listed the committee members, which took approximately 3 minutes and included nobody from Earth. I said, yes, that was what I had thought. She asked if there was something wrong with the document. I said that a document apologizing to a people, written entirely without the participation of that people, had a specific kind of problem embedded in it that no amount of formal sealing could fix. I said this quietly and without accusation, which I had practiced, because the goal was not to make her feel the way she had made me feel, which was not something that would help anyone. She was quiet. Then she said, in English this time, that she took the point. I asked her to tell me, not from the document, why she had come. She was still for a moment in the way that Tool are still when they are deciding something. Then she said, and I could hear that she was choosing her words carefully, that 3 council sectors were experiencing food supply failures, that 2 member species were in active conflict over resources that had previously been managed through infrastructure that was now inadequately maintained, that the accord itself was in a condition she described as fragile, which from a grand legate was the diplomatic equivalent of a significant admission. I said I was aware of these developments. She looked at me. She asked how I was aware. I said I had friends. She understood immediately. She did not ask who. She nodded, once, which for the Tool was a gesture they had adopted from watching humans, which I found briefly and painfully interesting. She asked, then, whether there was a path. She said it in English. She said whether there is a path, and she said it without the ceremony and the formal phrasing, and the high galactic that had always been the armor of council negotiations. She said it the way a person says something when the armor is too heavy, and they have put it down, temporarily, because the situation requires it. I said that there was a path. I said that it was not a short one, and that it was not going to look like what she was expecting, and that I was not in a position to make any decisions unilaterally, because Earth made its decisions the way Earth had always made them, together, loudly, imperfectly, and with everyone allowed to disagree. She said she understood. I looked at the scroll on the table. I picked it up, not to open it, just to hold it for a moment. It was heavier than it looked, which might have been the material, or might have been the weight of the 14 seals, or might have been something else entirely. I set it back down and told her I needed to make some calls. She said she would wait. Owen brought her tea while she waited, which was human tea, which she had never had before. She took it and held the cup and looked at it for a moment before she drank. Her expression was careful and then, just briefly, surprised. Something about the flavor, perhaps, or the warmth of it, or the simple fact that someone had brought her something without being asked. It was such a small thing, and I sat in the next room making calls to Parliament, and to Hale, and to Kalon, and to Nina, and to 3 former council station physicians, and 2 infrastructure engineers. And I thought about how many small things had been done over 40 years by people who were never thanked for any of them, and how the absence of those small things had brought the Grand Legate of the Tool Dominion across 22 days of difficult space to sit in a small functional room in Cardiff and hold a cup of tea and wait. She had crossed 30 light years to hand me a document that still did not say the one thing it needed to say. But she had come. She was here. She was holding the tea, and she was waiting. That was not nothing. The Parliament Chamber in London was not originally built for the kind of meeting we were about to have. It had been designed for arguments between people who shared a planet and a legal system, not for determining the terms under which humanity would re-engage with an interstellar governing body that had spent 40 years undervaluing everything we offered. But it was a large room with good acoustics and a tradition of not giving up, and so it was where we gathered on a Thursday morning in early November, with rain against the windows and more people in the gallery than the fire code was strictly comfortable with. I sat at the front bench with Kaylan Marsh on my left, Nina Okafor on my right, and Owen Dre 1 row back, which was where he preferred to be because he was better at watching than at speaking, and had long ago made peace with that. Director Hale sat at the center of the government bench, which was the correct arrangement, since she was the one who would ultimately sign whatever we agreed on. She had been director for 9 years, and had the kind of stillness that comes from having made hard decisions for a long time, and knowing how they feel on the way in and the way out. Sovran 3 was present via relay, a 3-dimensional projection seated in a specially arranged section of the chamber that had been set up the night before. The image was good enough that you could see her expression clearly and read her hands, which for the tool was almost as important. She had 3 aides with her. She was in formal attire. She had not brought the scroll. The session opened with a statement from Director Hale, who was brief and direct in the way that career directors tend to be. She said that humanity had withdrawn from the Galactic Accord not as an act of hostility, but as an act of honesty. She said that Earth intended to re-engage, under specific conditions, in the interest of a genuine and equal partnership, and that those conditions were not negotiable as a package, though the Council was welcome to discuss the language of individual clauses. She said that humanity was not interested in returning to what had existed before, because what had existed before had not worked, and Earth had simply been the last species to admit it. She handed the floor to me. I stood up, which made the gallery go quiet in that particular way. Galleries go quiet when something is actually about to be said rather than performed. I had written my statement 3 times and thrown away 2 versions. The one I was holding was short. I had learned, over 22 years of diplomacy, that the most important things take the fewest words, and that the more words you use, the easier it is to hide in them. I said that Earth was prepared to re-engage with the Galactic Accord on the following terms. I read them plainly, without preamble. Full and permanent voting membership, with no further provisional designation, effective immediately upon agreement. No review period. No assessment. Permanent. Human military personnel to serve in Council operations only under mandates explicitly approved by Earth's own government, with no deployment ordered, extended, or modified without Earth's formal consent. A comprehensive memorial record, maintained in the Council's primary archive and accessible to all member species, documenting the name, service, and death of every human who had died in Council military engagements since Earth's provisional membership began. Not a commendation. A record. Joint oversight of all infrastructure on which human expertise had historically been concentrated, with human engineers and specialists holding equal authority to Council representatives on all relevant maintenance and safety boards. And the last term, the one that had been argued over longest in our preparatory sessions, and about which I had been most certain from the beginning. A formal statement, delivered in open Council session, in every one of the 47 registered galactic languages, and broadcast on the public Council channel available to all member species, acknowledging specifically, and without diplomatic softening, that the Accord had undervalued, undercompensated, and failed to adequately credit human contributions to Council stability for the duration of Earth's membership, and that the subsequent withdrawal of human participation had directly contributed to the current instability of Council systems and sectors. The chamber was very quiet after I finished. Sovran 3 said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, through the relay, that the last term was essentially a public acknowledgement of council failure. I said yes, that was correct. She said that the council's position was that such an acknowledgement would be perceived as a significant humiliation. I said that it was not humiliation. I said it was accuracy. I said that the difference between humiliation and truth was that truth could be built on, and that the accord needed something to build on that was not going to collapse the next time a human navigator went home. She asked me, carefully, what the consequence would be if the council could not accept the last term. I did not answer immediately. I looked at Kalon, who gave me the expression he used when he agreed with me, and did not want to say so out loud, because he had spent his career in rooms where disagreement was strategically useful. I looked at Nina, who was watching Sovereign Three's projection, with the focused attention of a scientist, observing something she has been waiting to see. I looked at the gallery, where there were faces I did not know, ordinary people who had followed the news for months and come to the chamber today because they wanted to see what humanity would do when it finally had something to negotiate from. I said that the consequence was not retaliation. I said Earth was not interested in retaliation. I said the consequence was simply that nothing would change. Earth would remain home. We would continue building what we had started building: the orbital ring, the new medical research network, the navigation systems we had quietly been improving for 30 years. And the council would continue managing without the people it had relied on and never acknowledged. And eventually one system or another would fail badly enough that the conversation would happen again, except later, and worse. I said it calmly, and without drama, because it was simply true, and simple true things do not require drama. Senator Adeyeze Cole from Lagos stood up from the parliament bench and asked to be recognized. She was 43. And she had been 7 years old when Earth came home, and she had grown up in a country that remembered what it felt like when its people went abroad and sent back everything they had, and received in return less than they deserved. She said, in the kind of voice that people use when they have thought about something their whole lives, and are finally in the room where it matters, that she wanted to ask the Grand Legate a direct question. Sovereign Three said she would receive it. Adeyeze said, "Are you here because you are sorry? Or are you here because you need us?" The silence after that question was the longest silence in the session. Sovereign Three's hands moved through two gestures that I recognized from years of watching Tool diplomats manage the gap between what they felt and what they could afford to say. Then she was still. Then she said, in English, which she had been using more often as the session went on, that the honest answer to that question was both, and that she was aware of the difference between them, and that she was not in a position to claim the first had come before the second. Adeyeze sat down. The gallery was very still. Hale said, quietly, that the honesty was appreciated. I thought of the 41 names. I thought of Nella Marsh in a field station where she had worked herself to exhaustion and come home without a commendation. I thought of Owen taking a photograph of an empty desk because he wanted there to be proof that we had been there. I thought of Drix, holding the data cube at a station observation window at what was probably 6 in the morning by his cycle, handing me evidence of everything and asking nothing in return. I said that we would give the council time to deliberate. I said that Earth's terms were formal and documented and would be transmitted through official channels. I said that we hoped the deliberation would be brief, not because we were impatient, but because the council's current situation did not have the luxury of patience, and we saw no reason to pretend otherwise. Sovereign Three said she understood. She said she would bring the terms to the full council immediately. She said, just before the relay closed, that she was grateful for the conversation. She said it in English. Not high galactic, not Tool standard. English. I sat back down. Kalon handed me a coffee without saying anything, which was his version of a significant gesture. It was not good coffee. I drank it anyway. The council had built its entire political architecture on the assumption that silence was agreement, that patience was consent, that the people who showed up and did the work without demanding recognition were satisfied with being allowed to continue doing the work. They had 40 years of evidence for this belief, because for 40 years, we had given them that evidence. We were about to teach them what silence actually means, and what it costs when it ends. The acceptance came in pieces, the way the council did everything, slowly, with qualifications, wrapped in procedural language that made each concession sound like a gift, rather than a recognition of reality. The first piece arrived 11 days after the Parliament session, acknowledging the terms regarding full voting membership and the military deployment conditions. It was signed by 7 council species and came with a 17-page document of supplementary notes that our legal team spent 2 days analyzing and ultimately declared acceptable. The second piece arrived 3 weeks later and addressed the Memorial Archive. This one had taken longer because 3 council species had objected to the scope of the record, not to the principle but to the requirement that every name be listed individually rather than aggregated by engagement. We held the line. When the second piece arrived, every name was individually listed, and the document included a provision for the archive to be maintained in perpetuity, with no degradation of access rights. I printed the name list and put it on the wall of my office. There were 207 names by then. We had extended the scope to include the auxiliary contractors and support personnel who had died in council service and been overlooked in the original 41 figure. Owen had done that research himself, quietly, over 6 weeks. He had not told me how many names he expected to find. When he sent me the final number, I sat with it for a long time. The third piece, the public acknowledgement, did not arrive. Not in the 4th week, not in the 5th, not in the 6 weeks after that. Messages from Drix confirmed that it was the source of the most internal council conflict, which surprised nobody who had spent time watching the council operate. The Tool were willing but worried about precedent. The Metch were reluctant on principle. 2 smaller species had indicated support in private and abstained in the formal sessions, which was a very council thing to do. On the 53rd day, Hale called me at home before 8 in the morning, which she only did when something had happened. She said the vote had passed. She said it was not unanimous, but that it had passed with sufficient margin to be binding. She said the broadcast date had been set for 15 days from now, and that she needed to know if I was prepared to be there in person. I said yes before she finished the sentence. The ship we traveled on was the HSV Covenant, which had come into service 8 months earlier as part of Earth's new long-range diplomatic fleet. It was human-built, human-crewed, and human-navigated, and it made the journey to the council station in 6 days and 14 hours, which was 3 days faster than any council ship had managed the same route in the past 2 years. Our navigator, a 29-year-old named Calla Pierce from Aberdeen who had qualified top of her class at the new Earth Navigation Institute, made a point of filing our precise route data with the council arrival office on approach, which she did with the complete neutrality of someone who is not making a point at all. I liked her immediately. The council station looked different than I remembered, and at first I could not identify why. Then I realized it was that several sections of the outer ring were darker than they should have been, environmental systems dimmed to compensate for reduced power throughput from maintenance backlogs. There were visible patches on the docking infrastructure where temporary materials had been used instead of the correct repair components. The whole structure had the specific look of something that had been held together carefully by people who were doing their best, and were not quite the people who should have been doing it. Owen stood next to me at the viewport as we came in. He said, very quietly, that the docking rings looked like they needed a full structural review. I said they probably did. He said he knew someone who could manage the assessment. I said I suspected he did. The human delegation walked through the main corridor of the station for the first time in 30 years. There were 12 of us, myself, Kalon, Nina, Owen, 2 engineers, 2 medical specialists, 2 legal advisors, and Calla Pierce, who had been added to the group because Hale felt the navigator should see where she was navigating to. The corridor was familiar and strange at once, the way a place you have known well becomes strange after a long absence. The proportions were the same. The light was slightly different. The quiet was not the kind of quiet that comes from calm, but the kind that comes from not quite enough going right. Several council staff stopped and watched us pass. I recognized a few faces, older than I remembered them. One Metch clerk whom I had spoken with hundreds of times over the years stopped, and then made the Metch gesture that translates approximately to, "I am relieved to see you." I returned it as best I could with human hands, which is never quite right, and the clerk seemed to find that appropriate. The council chamber was full, 200 species, most represented in person, a few present by relay. The gallery was open, which was unusual for a formal session of this nature, and it was filled. The air had the density of a room where many beings have been sitting and thinking for a long time. Grand Speaker Veth of the Mech presided. The Grand Speaker was a position of procedural authority, responsible for the conduct of sessions but not the policy, and Veth had held it for decades. His voice was the one that carried the weight of ceremony, and today the ceremony was unprecedented in the Council's recorded history. He called the session to order. He stated the purpose. He stated the resolution number. He stated that what would follow was a formal acknowledgement entered into the permanent Council record. Then he began to read. He read in High Galactic first, which was the ceremonial opening language. Then one of the Council translators read in Tool Standard. Then another in Velhari Common. Then in Mech Formal. Then in Feluran. Then in the languages of smaller species, one after another, the acknowledgement moving through every registered tongue of the Accord in a recitation that took, in total, 3 hours and 58 minutes. I had been told this was the longest formal session in Council history that did not involve a declaration of war. The acknowledgement said, in every language, that humanity had served the Accord with excellence and had not been recognized adequately for that service. That the withdrawal of human participation had revealed how deeply Council systems had depended on human expertise in ways the Council had failed to formally acknowledge or compensate. That the Council accepted full responsibility for the conditions that had led to humanity's withdrawal. That the terms of re-engagement had been accepted in full, and that Earth held full, permanent, equal membership in the Galactic Accord from this moment forward. It said the names, all 207, in every language. That part alone took 40 minutes, and the chamber was completely silent throughout, which was not a silence of boredom or impatience, but the silence of a room full of beings sitting with something. I sat in the human seat, which was in a new position, central, permanent, larger than the provisional seat I had occupied for 22 years, and I did not feel triumphant. I had known I would not. Triumph requires a clear winner and a clear loser, and what was happening here was not that. What was happening here was something more like the aftermath of something. The moment after a long and difficult thing has resolved itself into the beginning of a different and hopefully better thing. Nina was beside me. At some point during the reading of the names, she reached over and took my hand, briefly, and then let go. I was grateful for it. Kalan, on my other side, was very still through the whole session, which for Kalan was remarkable. He had a lot of energy, normally. He used it. Today he sat with it contained, and his jaw set, and his eyes forward, and I did not need to ask what he was thinking about. After the session, as the chamber was emptying, Drix found me in the corridor. He was walking with a cane, which he had not had before, and his silver skin had taken on the slightly translucent quality that Velhari develop as they age, so that in certain lights you could see faint traceries of their circulatory system beneath the surface. He looked like something ancient and delicate. He looked wonderful. He said nothing. He gripped my hand with both of his, which for the Velhari was something you did for family, and he held it for a long moment, and I let him. Then he said, in the dry tone I had missed for 30 years, that he had been worried I was going to let the Council apologize itself to death before we arrived, and that he was pleased I had shown up in time to make it mean something. I laughed. It surprised me, the sound of it, real and uncomplicated, the way laughing is when you have not done it in a long time, and then something is genuinely funny. I said I had been planning to show up all along. I said I just wanted them to understand what showing up was worth. He said he thought they were beginning to understand. He said it would take time. He said understanding usually did. I walked, later, back through the station corridor to the observation deck, the one where I had stood 30 years ago, the morning before the last shuttle left, looking at the stars through a window and feeling the particular stillness of a decision already made. The window was in the same place. The stars looked the same, which they always do, being too far away to show their changes in any human span of watching. I stood there for a long time. Calla Pierce found me there after a while. She was still carrying her navigator's bag and looked like someone who had just finished a long task and was not sure what to do with her hands now that the work was done. She stood beside me and looked out the window and did not immediately say anything, which I respected. Then she asked me what it felt like to be back. I thought about it. I thought about 22 years of trying and 30 years of not being here, and the reading of 207 names in 47 languages, in a room full of beings who had not known those names until today, and now could not unknow them. I said it felt like something I did not have a word for. I said it was not pride exactly. I said it was something older than pride and quieter than victory. It felt like standing in a place where you had been, and being known in it, not for the first time, but finally in the right way. She thought about that. Then she said it sounded like being a navigator. She said that was how it felt when a jump worked. Not exciting. Just the deep, exact satisfaction of arriving where you meant to go. I said yes. That was exactly it. We came back not because they needed us, though they did. We came back because the stars are better with someone in them who still remembers how to grieve. Someone who carries names. Someone who does not let the silence be read as forgetting. We had never forgotten. We had just gone quiet, for a while, so that everyone else could finally hear it.